Sophia was running late, as usual. The café was bustling, and she barely had time to grab her regular coffee before racing to the office. She hated mornings like this, rushed, chaotic, and exhausting. But today felt different, not in the usual sense of stress, but something deeper. As she jogged across the street, juggling her phone, bag, and coffee, a sudden wave of dizziness hit her. The world tilted, and everything blurred into one swirling mass of sound and light. She stumbled, barely catching herself on the corner of a parked car. Her heart pounded in her chest like it was trying to escape, and the edges of her vision darkened. She tried to steady herself, gripping the car door, but her hands were trembling. "Are you okay, miss?" a passerby asked, their voice muffled and distant. Sophia blinked, trying to shake the dizziness away, but it lingered, gnawing at her senses. Her heart raced faster, and she realized something was wrong, terribly wrong. Hours later, Sophia sat in a sterile hospital room, the beeping of machines echoing around her. The fluorescent lights above her head buzzed softly, adding to the surrealness of it all. The doctor entered, his face stern and unreadable, holding a clipboard that seemed far heavier than it looked. "We found something on the MRI," he began, his voice flat and controlled, the kind of tone that doctors use when they know the news will break you. "It's a tumor in your brain. We don't know yet if it's benign or malignant, but it's pressing on areas that control your motor functions." Tumor, brain. The words hit Sophia like a train. She tried to process them, but they clashed violently against everything she thought she knew about herself, about her life. Tumor, brain. These were words that didn't belong to her world. Not her, not at 32 years old, not with her thriving career, her full life. "Is it serious?" she asked, her voice cracking. The doctor looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "It's serious, yes. We'll need more tests, but you'll likely need surgery, and there could be long-term effects." Surgery. Long-term effects. The room began to close in on her, suffocating her with its smallness. The beeping of the machines became louder, more insistent, like a countdown she couldn't control. Sophia's hands shook as she tried to grip the sides of the hospital bed. This couldn't be happening. The days that followed were a blur. She went through the motions, more tests, consultations, and somber discussions with specialists. But all the while, it felt like she was outside her own body, watching someone else's life unravel. Fear gnawed at her relentlessly, a constant undercurrent that bubbled beneath her attempts to stay composed. But no matter how hard she tried to keep herself together, the cracks began to show. One evening, as she sat in her apartment alone, the weight of everything crashed down on her. The uncertainty, the looming threat of surgery, the possibility of her life never being the same again. It all swirled together in a suffocating cloud of dread. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection, searching for some trace of the person she used to be. But all she saw was someone who was breaking. "Why is this happening to me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own breathing. She pressed her hands against the sink, trying to steady herself, but the tears came anyway. Hot, angry tears that spilled over as her fear turned into raw, unchecked frustration. She was furious. Furious at her body for betraying her. Furious at the doctors who couldn't give her definitive answers. Furious at the world for continuing to spin as if nothing had changed. But most of all, she was furious with herself, for feeling weak, for not knowing how to fight this. Sophia's surgery was scheduled 3 weeks after the diagnosis. 3 long weeks where she teetered on the edge of hope and despair, her emotions fluctuating wildly from one day to the next. Some mornings she would wake up with a strange sense of clarity, convincing herself that she could handle whatever came next. Other days, the fear returned with a vengeance, making it hard to breathe, let alone function. The morning of the surgery arrived, and everything felt eerily calm. Her parents sat in the waiting room, holding hands, their faces lined with worry. Sophia tried to focus on their presence, grounding herself in the familiar love that had always been her anchor. But as they wheeled her into the operating room, the sterile smells, the cold metal surfaces, and the faceless doctors surrounding her brought the terror back tenfold. The last thing she remembered before the anesthesia took over was the blinding white light overhead, and the thought that this might be the last time she ever felt truly whole. The surgery was successful, but Sophia's recovery was anything but smooth. She woke up to a world that felt distant and unfamiliar, her body heavy and unresponsive. The pain was sharp, slicing through the fog of medication, and when she tried to move her left arm, nothing happened. Panic surged through her, but her body refused to respond, trapping her in a prison of her own skin. Days passed, and though the pain subsided, the fear did not. Physical therapists came and went, guiding her through exercises meant to regain the movement she had lost, but progress was slow, agonizingly slow. She watched others in her rehab sessions, people who had experienced strokes, accidents, surgeries, some recovering faster, some slower, but all struggling in their own ways. It was there, in that shared space of pain and determination, that Sophia began to confront the depth of her frustration. "I'm never going to be the same," she said one day to her therapist, her voice edged with bitterness. "Why did this happen to me? I had everything planned. I was supposed to be more." The therapist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, paused for a moment. "I don't know why these things happen," she said gently, "but I've seen a lot of people come through here. And what I've learned is that who you were before doesn't have to define who you'll be after." The days were long and filled with small victories that, at first, felt meaningless. But slowly, as weeks turned into months, Sophia began to notice the changes. A twitch in her fingers, a slight bend in her knee. Each movement, no matter how small, felt like a glimpse of the life she thought she had lost. And though the process was grueling, she began to realize something. She wasn't powerless. Sophia still had bad days where the frustration and fear overwhelmed her. But there were also days where she felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. It wasn't a grand sweeping realization, but a slow burn, something that grew with each step she took. With every moment she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future that looked different but wasn't any less valuable. Months after her surgery, Sophia stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea. The wind whipped through her hair, and the vastness of the ocean stretched out before her, endless and alive. She had driven to the coast alone, something she never would have done before. But something inside her had changed. She wasn't fully recovered yet. Her left arm still moved stiffly, her body still bore the scars of the surgery. But she had learned to live with the imperfections. More than that, she had learned to live with the uncertainty, to embrace the unknown. As she stared out at the horizon, she thought about the person she used to be, the one who had needed everything to be perfect, planned, controlled. That version of her was gone. But in its place was someone stronger, someone who had learned that life wasn't about avoiding pain or fear, but about facing it head-on and finding meaning in the midst of it all. Sophia breathed deeply, the salt air filling her lungs. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt free. Life, she realized, was never about being whole or perfect. It was about living fully, embracing the cracks, and finding beauty in the brokenness. Sophia had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to truly understand what living meant. And as she turned away from the edge of the cliff, she smiled to herself, knowing that no matter what came next, she was ready.